Louisiana is a state well known for having an eerie history of voodoo, hauntings, and chilling legends. The mix of West African, Western European, Cajun, and Creole ancestry blends history, mystery, and the supernatural in the very air of this 18th state of the Union. Because of this unique and mysterious culture, Louisiana stands apart from every other state in America. From 1993 to 2006, a different type of specter haunted southern Louisiana. During a 10 to 12-year period, more than 60 women were murdered or went missing in Baton Rouge and surrounding areas. In fact, at the time, this area had the highest murder rate in the entire country, surpassing even New York and Los Angeles. Investigators struggled for years trying to pin down a person or even a profile of a perpetrator, until evidence finally revealed why the murders were so difficult to solve. This period in Louisiana history was terrifying. The Baton Rouge area was under a siege of mistrust and fear. Women's lives were drastically changed, and when law enforcement finally solved the riddle, what they discovered was a perfect storm so unlikely, so rare and hard to believe, that the facts sent investigators, citizens, and victims' families reeling. This time in Louisiana is still studied today in local, state, and federal criminal justice and law classrooms, and in behavioral science classrooms, and that is not likely to change. Sit here with me tonight and settle in, because the story I'm about to tell you is still whispered in the swamps and bayous of southern Louisiana. It's discussed in the halls of justice. It's whispered in LSU dormitories and off-campus apartments. It speaks of an evil and of circumstances so profound that even the most hardened law enforcement officers are still shaken decades later. Is there anything better than a well-told story? I don't mean a movie or a social media reel, I mean a story, told by a skilled storyteller. I don't think so. An engaging tale, told in the right place at the right time, by the right person, captures us. It captures our imaginations. It takes us away from the here and now and carries us to the what if. When we were kids, was there anything better than sitting around a campfire, the cold, dark night at our backs, the warmth and light of the fire drawing us closer, comforting us as we listened to a well-spun tale? Here in the South, a welcoming front porch is often where we spin our tales now. It's familiar, and it welcomes others to join us. At the end of the day, when we put away our cares and responsibilities for just a few hours, we sit and we talk, and maybe we rock in a comfortable chair, and we're taken back to a time when the story was the thing, the only thing. So join me tonight, won't you, as we step into another tale that's rooted in truth so difficult to fathom that it defies belief. And to keep the dark and the cold at bay, I'll turn on the light. The following podcast contains material that may be disturbing. Listener discretion is advised. In the city of Baton Rouge in southern Louisiana, home of Louisiana State University, people are friendly. There was a time not so long ago that they didn't even lock their doors at night, and in fact they'd readily open their doors to complete strangers. Baton Rouge had a small-town atmosphere with a bustling college community in its midst. People felt safe and at home here. In August 1992, Connie Lynn Warner was at home in the Oak Shadows subdivision in Zachary, Louisiana, sitting in her favorite chair and cross-stitching. Hearing a knock at her front door, she cautiously opened the door just a crack. When neither her family nor her co-workers saw or heard from her for 2 days after that, she was reported missing. When police entered her home to check on her, they found smeared and splattered blood on the floors and walls, but Connie was nowhere to be found. The washer and dryer in her home had been moved as though she had held onto them as she was being dragged from her home and out to her car. Both her car and her body were found dumped in a remote area in Baton Rouge a couple of weeks later. Her keys had been removed. Sadly, any evidence that might have been gathered by law enforcement officers was washed away by Hurricane Andrew, the massive storm that barreled into Louisiana on August 16th. Even so, the cause of her death was clearly beating and blunt force trauma to the head. Connie had also been sexually assaulted. The brutal crime remained unsolved for years. In April 1998, nurse Randy Mybrewer went missing from her home in Oak Shadows subdivision. Her 3-year-old son was found wandering the neighborhood one morning, covered in blood, and asking neighbors if he could play with their children. While Randy's ex-husband was an initial person of interest, he was quickly ruled out. Besides, what father would leave his son to witness such a horrible scene? This case, too, remained unsolved for years. The two murders had to be related, though, didn't they? Because they both took place in the same neighborhood. But they were also 6 years apart. Maybe it was all just a tragic coincidence. Between the years 2001 and 2003, 6 more women's lives in the same general vicinity were viciously snuffed out. The victims were 39-year-old nurse Gina Wilson Green, 21-year-old college student Geraldine Barr DeSoto, 22-year-old graduate student Charlotte Murray Pace, 44-year-old antique shop owner Pamela Kennemore, 23-year-old Trinisha Dene Colombe, who was in the Army and planned to join the Marines, and Carrie Lynn Yoder, a 26-year-old graduate student. These women were sexually assaulted, ruthlessly beaten, and murdered. Brutality, rape, and bloody crime scenes tied all of these tragic murders together. So did the southern Louisiana location. Baffled, cops went back to the drawing board, reconstructing crimes as far back as 1992, comparing known facts and trying desperately to see patterns and connections. This retracing of crimes on record revealed to detectives that in April '93, 2 teens were parking in a cemetery near the Oak Shadows subdivision in southern Louisiana. From out of nowhere, a man began attacking the pair, hacking at them with a blade and a saw, and leaving both of them severely injured. A police officer happened to be driving by and saw the dome light of the car on. Deciding to investigate, he came upon a bloody and chaotic scene. The attacker saw the officer, grabbed the car keys out of the ignition, and ran off into the thick woods behind the cemetery. The teens survived the attack, but they were both horribly traumatized by it. Oak Shadows subdivision. The killer must live near or even in that neighborhood, or he must have some connection to it. That seemed to be a logical conclusion that couldn't be ignored. The meticulous retracing of crimes also revealed to investigators that on March 21, 1994, 81-year-old Anne Bryan was murdered inside her apartment in an upscale retirement home in southern Louisiana. A man had broken into her apartment and attempted to rape her. When she resisted and began screaming, the man strangled her, cut her throat, and then stabbed her repeatedly. He also disemboweled the elderly woman after she was dead. But whether because of fear of discovery or simple inability, he did not rape her. On January 4th, 1999, almost 5 years after Anne Bryant's murder, sex worker Catherine Hall approached a car with the promise of giving the driver oral sex for a price. The man tried to kill her by strangling her with a zip tie, but when she tried to escape, he instead stabbed her to death before undressing her, dumping her body in a swampy area, and then mutilating it. She had not been raped. 4 months later, Hardy Schmidt, whom the killer spotted jogging in the southern area of Baton Rouge, was being followed, though she had no idea. Hardy was from a prominent, well-respected family. Her father was a judge and her husband an attorney. 3 weeks later, the murderer again saw her jogging and intentionally hit her with his car, knocking her into a ditch. Tying a zip tie tightly around her neck, the man took her to an isolated area where he attempted to rape her but did not, then killed her before placing her body in a truck. 2 days later, he dumped her in a bayou in St. James Parish, where her body was soon discovered. On November 12th, a man presumed to be the same killer lured, then murdered Joyce Williams, promising her money for sex. He then took her corpse to his home, where he showered with it, danced with it, mutilated it, and then engaged in cannibalism. He then dumped her body where it wouldn't be discovered until January of the following year. He managed to do all this without his wife discovering his vulgar misdeeds. The patterns of these crimes didn't make sense. Clearly, a madman, a serial killer, was prowling southern Louisiana. But serial killers have patterns, routines, and practices from which they do not deviate. They're cunning and calculating, but still, their process matters a great deal to them. So why then were some of the victims raped and some not? And post-mortem mutilation? That is not an afterthought or an experiment for a killer. Why did some of these women suffer that fate and some did not? Why were some of these women attacked in their homes and others lured to their fate? None of what was happening made sense, and that made this killer very difficult to catch. In 2002, LSU graduate Charlotte Marie Pace was a beautiful, vivacious, trusting young woman at that magical, fleeting age when the entire world was at her feet and anything was possible. A bright young woman with career and life plans that perhaps only a recent college graduate can conjure, Charlotte, or Murray as her friends called her, was planning to move to Atlanta at the end of the summer. She and her roommate lived in a townhome adjacent to the LSU campus in Baton Rouge, a very safe area, people believed. On the afternoon of May 31st, 2002, someone knocked at Murray's door, and like most other young women in the area at the time, she opened it without a second thought. Later that day, her roommate came home to find her body lying in a pool of blood. The walls, floors, mattress, and linens were soaked with her blood. Charlotte Marie Pace had been stabbed more than 80 times. She had been raped. It was clear to investigators that she had fought hard for her life. Had this been a domestic issue? Police had no idea. As far as they knew at the time, there had been no other similar crimes in the area in recent memory, so the thought of a serial killer never occurred to law enforcement in Pace's case. Keep in mind, however, that several sex workers had been murdered in recent years, their bodies grotesquely mutilated. But as is sadly typical, these murders did not receive the police and media attention that others might have. It seems that to the media, and sometimes to law enforcement, prostitutes who lose their lives as the result of living high-risk lifestyles aren't considered as newsworthy as are more mainstream women. There were similarities in all these murders, but there were also some crucial differences, ones that were clearly seen during the broader investigation, as murders as far back as 10 years were being re-examined. In that same month, LSU student and jogger Christine Moore was approached by a man as she ran along the top of a levee, as many runners did. Christine was in great shape physically, but still, this man managed to abduct her, beat her, presumably rape her, kill her, and leave her body in a bayou. A month later, her skeletal remains were found by congregants at Ebenezer Baptist Church, located right next to that bayou. The murder rate of women rose sharply in 2002. Women were warned not to walk anywhere alone. They were warned against outdoor exercise, particularly against running on levees, which was a favorite choice of joggers because of the beautiful lakes and scenery. They were told not to use headphones or earplugs when out and about. They were told to lock their windows and doors and not to engage in conversation with strangers, no matter how innocent the interaction may seem. They began to arm themselves with firearms and with pepper spray, and they signed up for self-defense classes in record numbers. A bloodthirsty, brutal murderer was loose in sleepy southern Louisiana. Law enforcement was at a complete loss. They needed the help of the FBI, and eventually, they asked for that help. Puzzling indeed, and very frustrating. The killer, whom many eyewitnesses identified as being a white man who drove a white pickup truck, was defying all the established criteria for serial killers. He raped, sometimes. He seemed to enjoy the stalking, the hunt, the bloodlust, and the brutal murder of an attractive professional woman or a student. Then, too, he seemed to have a penchant for sex workers who are such easy prey for murder. They seldom have family who notices their absence, and it's sadly difficult to get the general public even mildly interested in crimes committed against them. In some cases, the blood and violence were staggering, and in others, the murder was a clean, simple strangulation, always with a zip tie. In those cases, post-mortem mutilations seemed to be the goal, not the acts of murder and rape. Sometimes the killer would lure his victim to go with him, and at other times he'd con or charm his way into their very homes and places of business, and commit his crimes right there without fear of discovery. At times, he'd take trophies from his victims, such as cell phones or jewelry or keys. At other times, his trophies were limbs, body parts, and pieces of skin. Serial killers rarely deviate from their process. Their taste in victims rarely changes. What was happening here? On February 6, 2004, the elusive killer murdered another victim, 43-year-old Donna Johnston. After taking 45 pictures of her body while it was in his trunk, he took it to an isolated location and dumped it in a ditch. He also took the time to pose the body first, and in the course of taking the macabre photos, he also snapped partial photos of his license plate. Remember that detail. All police were sure of was that they were looking for a white male. Eyewitnesses pointed to that, and frankly, statistics bear out the fact that most serial killers in the United States are white males. It wasn't much to go on, but it was all that law enforcement had. And then in 2003, a Dr. Tony Fridakis in Sarasota, Florida, claimed to have perfected a new DNA technology called SNPs, or single nucleotide polymorphism, that breaks the ethnicity of a murder suspect down by percentage. In more than 3,000 blind tests of the then cutting-edge technology, Frudakis' lab had not confirmed one single error. Having been made aware of the unsolved murders in Baton Rouge, Frudakis offered the technology to the Serial Murder Task Force. Skeptical law enforcement officers and task force members first submitted their own DNA for testing just to see whether Frudakis was offering junk science or a viable tool. Without exception, the SNP's DNA test identified every single sample with precision, even surprising some officers with the knowledge that somewhere in their family bloodline there was black, white, Hispanic, Native American, or Asian blood in the mix. Convinced the technology was accurate, police submitted the killer's DNA to Frudakis' lab for testing. Sure, the killer was white, and following the FBI profile that strongly suggested a white perpetrator, at least test results supporting that assumption would keep the investigation moving forward. Imagine the surprise, even the shock, when after studying DNA found at some of the crime scenes, Frudakis concluded that the Baton Rouge serial killer had about 80% African affiliation and 15% Native American affiliation. In other words, the killer was not white after all. Years of investigation wasted. Based on the new test results, detectives shifted their focus. The DNA samples sent to Dr. Frudakis matched samples taken from several of the rape and murder victims. Now, we must remember that when a sex worker is tested for DNA residue, many sources of DNA may be at play. That's not a judgment, it's simply the nature of that high-risk life. But when the selected DNA profile was run through the nationwide system that compares DNA samples to those of known criminals, technicians found a match. It belonged to an African-American, Southern Louisiana man named Derek Todd Lee. An arrest warrant was issued for Lee, and simultaneous visits by police officers to several known addresses for Lee were conducted at the same time, but he was nowhere to be found. Cell phone tracking technology, also relatively new at the time, indicated that Lee was in the wind, and in fact had fled to Atlanta, Georgia. Warned by Louisiana law enforcement, the Atlanta Police Department's fugitive squad arrested Derek Todd Lee on May 27, 2003. The Louisiana Task Force spokesman informed marshals in Atlanta that Lee would likely kill at least one more time, knowing that he was very close to being apprehended. Time was of the essence. Then Atlanta Police Chief Richard Pennington later said that once located, Lee did not resist arrest. Quoting Pennington now, "I know now that we have taken a very dangerous person that's a serial murder suspect off the streets of Atlanta, and I'm sure the citizens of Louisiana are proud as well that we've taken this very dangerous person off our streets." Later that week, Lee was extradited back to Louisiana. The women of Baton Rouge and surrounding areas could breathe easy again, and they did. Police officers could rest easy, knowing that they finally had their man. The days of working around the clock with little or no sleep and mounting pressure were over. As the investigation and trial unfolded, the public learned that Lee was a smooth talker, a skilled con man, and he could charm almost anyone into opening the door of their home or into going home from a bar with him. He had a wife, he had a girlfriend, and he had children. He had an IQ of 65, yet he managed to elude police for years. How? Derek Todd Lee is credited with 8 brutal rapes and murders, though he was only tried for 2. He received a life sentence for one murder and the death penalty for the other, Charlotte Murray Pace. Upon receiving news of this last, he soiled himself in the courtroom. When Lee was arrested, the nightmare was finally over. And then, the unthinkable. On February 6, 2004, as I mentioned earlier, 43-year-old Donna Johnston was found murdered. It was Donna's body that had been taken to an isolated location and dumped in a ditch like so much discarded trash. It was Donna's body that had been posed and photographed. All of this happened on a rainy night, as luck would have it, and on rainy nights in Louisiana, where the mud and silt are already thick, tires leave clear, unmistakable tracks. Stunned as they were, members of the task force that found Derek Todd Lee went right back to work. The tire tracks at the dump site were important, as those tires were not a terribly popular brand in southern Louisiana. Only 90 purchases of that tire had been made in Baton Rouge. Using true old-school gumshoe police work, officers were able to narrow down a list of people in southern Louisiana who had purchased the aqua treads, and they began going door to door, talking to people who had purchased those tires. In April 2004, officers knocked on the door of Sean Vincent Gillis. By that time, they already had a DNA sample of the killer taken from Donna Johnston's body. It matched DNA taken from other murder victims whose cases had remained unsolved for years. Officers asked Gillis to accompany them to headquarters under the guise of hoping he could shed light on suspicious things he may have seen in the area of his home near the LSU campus. Hours of interrogation revealed that yes, Gillis had the AquaTread tires on his car, and yes, he had actually driven his car to the very same isolated area where Johnston's body was found. He explained that he had pulled off the highway at that spot to relieve himself, the very same spot where Johnston's body had been discovered. A search warrant for Gillis's home had been executed while detectives interrogated him. Officers found disturbing pornography on Gillis's computer, as well as 45 photos of Donna Johnston's posed, nude, bruised body in the trunk of his car. In some of those photos, Gillis had also captured partial images of his own license plate. Interestingly, police also found an extensive collection of news clips and photos of Derek Todd Lee and his crimes. It seems Sean Vincent Gillis looked to Lee as a hero of sorts, and he actually took a 3-year hiatus from murdering women, as he did not wish to share the spotlight with another serial killer or to detract from Lee's accomplishments. As it turned out, both killers were operating in the same exact area, sometimes even in the same neighborhood, without each other's knowledge. During Gillis's interview with detectives, and once he had admitted to his crimes, he joked with one of the men. Quoting here, "Don't ever try eating human skin. I don't recommend it. I mean, I have bad teeth, very sharp, and I chewed and finally had to spit it out. I couldn't swallow it, and it tasted terrible." End quote. Detectives were stunned and sickened by this man's cavalier attitude toward his horrible crimes, as he went on to describe how he had showered with Joyce Williams' body, then danced and played with it before disposing of it. When Gillis's wife Terry told police that she had to hear her husband admit to the gruesome crimes himself before she'd believe it, they allowed her to talk with him in the interview room. Terry asked Gillis point blank, "Did you do all the things they say you did?" Gillis shrugged, smiled, as his wife said, a cute smile, and answered, "Yes, honey bunny, I'm sorry." 8 murders were credited to Gillis as well, and surprisingly, Sean Vincent Gillis was sentenced to life in prison, not death, for his heinous crimes. Jurors, it seems, could not agree on handing down the death penalty, as some sort of mental illness they believed caused him to do the monstrous things that he did. Victims' families were shocked and frustrated by that sentence, but it still stands. Gillis is serving his life sentence at Angola, the same prison that housed Lee as he awaited his execution. Lee, incidentally, died in a Louisiana hospital, having complained of feeling ill while in his prison cell. His cause of death is listed as heart disease. He was 47 years old. 8 murders each, 8 to Lee and 8 to Gillis. According to the Baton Rouge chief of police, even if he had been able to pin 10 murders each on these 2 men, that still leaves 40 missing and murdered women for whom families needed answers. Those women deserve to be laid to rest in peace. To this day, there are still no answers, and believe it or not, from 1993 on, at the same time that these 2 separate serial killers had southern Louisiana paralyzed with fear, another storm was brewing in the same area, in Jefferson Davis Parish, and southern Louisiana would once again be rocked to its core. Join me next time as we take a close look at this case rife with murder, corruption, and true Louisiana noir. I'm Carol Townsend, veteran newspaper journalist and 6-time award-winning author. You can find me at caroltownsend.com, anywhere on social media, and be sure to check out the Front Porch Mysteries Facebook page. I'd love to hear from you. As always, thanks for listening, and if you're enjoying these tales of Southern history and lore, I hope you'll tell your friends. My team and I researched this baffling case using the following resources: Office of Justice Programs, OJP.gov; AETV, Derek Todd Lee, Serial Killer; Investigation Discovery, Baton Rouge Serial Killer; WAFB Channel 9, Baton Rouge, April 29, 2004; Shreveport Times, February 19, 2025; and the documentary Butchers of the Bayou.